All right. Welcome again. Thanks so much for being here, guys. This is the last Kaleo. My name is Gabe, and I am one of the pastors here at Canyon View Vineyard Church. And so today we wanted to just really celebrate and enjoy some of the great things that God has done through this Wednesday night gathering over the years. And I wanted to invite a couple of guys who have been super instrumental in that process, Paul Watson and Nate Ralston. As they make their way to the stage, would you just clap incessantly loud for them? They walk slow, so just keep clapping. Just manufacture it. If it's not there, just make it be there, okay? Thank you. Thank you. You can stop now. So these guys are going to take a little seat here. You sit in the middle, Paul. You're the best looking, so clearly.
20 years ago.
So we wanted to just kind of take a minute to kind of remember, celebrate, just express what God has done over the past several years. So Paul, he's been, would you just tell us kind of like who you are, how this thing started, and kind of what you're doing now?
I'm the pastor of the Downtown Vineyard Church. And literally the way this thing started was Nate Ralston was interning in our youth, doing youth. You come back from college, and we'd had this great evening. We had a bunch of kids show up, and middle school and high school was just blowing and going, and we have this great evening. We clean up. We're walking out the doors of the youth room, and I turn over and I'm like, dude, tonight was awesome. And he goes, tonight sucked. Because he's an optimist, eternal. Right?
Totally.
And I looked at him and said, what do you mean tonight sucked? He said, dude, I come back here every year from college, and there's stuff for middle school guys, there's stuff for high school guys, and there is nothing for anybody my age. And he said, I just get tired of it. I just get tired of the fact that we pour into middle school students and high school students, and we forget about people that are post-high school, 18 to 25. I looked at him and said, dude, let's do something about it. And so the very next week, Nate let me know he was going back to college, and we started the Door.
That was pretty much it. Yeah.
That was pretty much it.
I went to the first one and nothing for 2 years.
Yeah, and that really was how it started. And so the very next week, I looked at him, I said, here's what you do. You invite everybody you know, I'll invite everybody I know. And so on a Wednesday night after service, we didn't want to do it in the youth building. We wanted it to be something completely separate, something that really spoke to young adults. And so we went and bought a bunch of tiki lamps, and we went over to Canyon View Park, and we set them out, and we lit a bunch of tiki lamps, and Tim Nutty showed up, I think the very, very first night, and said, hey, I'm going to stick around, dude. I want to do worship for this thing. And that's how it started. We had about 40 people show up that very first night.
That's so cool, man. I guess like for me at that time, what was that, like 12, 13
2003.
years ago? 2003?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 13 years ago.
13 years ago.
And so for me, I was 15 then. So just if you wanted to feel old tonight, I know. But I'm thinking about like, so as it took off and stuff, what did you see God do? So that first initial meeting, and then what kind of sparked out of that, and what did you see God do through that?
We just, it was this moment, there's kind of these moments in ministry, and so I pastor the Downtown Vineyard Church currently. And there's these moments that you watch that the Lord does something, and when the Lord does something, there's just energy behind it. Like you can work something, make something work, and you can work it, and it's hard and hard and hard. But when God's doing something, all of a sudden they're just, like, it just happens. And so in that piece, what we started seeing was for years upon years upon years, we would watch people come out of our student ministry, and student ministry going strong, and people who love Jesus. And probably the thing that broke my heart the most as a youth pastor, because I was a youth pastor for 19 years. And what broke my heart the most was you'd see these people who committed their life to Jesus. They'd gone to camps, they'd gone to Wednesday night services or whatever services they were in. They'd been raised in Christian homes, and they would go off, and there was just nothing that gave them any support. And so you'd run into them, 6 months later, or 8 months later, or a year later, or 2 years later, and they're really far from the church. And what you started seeing all of a sudden was you started seeing this place where young people got to continue in their faith, and they got to do so in a way that carried them through their 20s. And it was a powerful, powerful moment.
It's really cool. I mean, I think that, now and it's funny because I'm the youth pastor here now, and so a lot of this is stuff that there's been a lot of really cool guys before, since you, and then a few other guys in between, and then now I'm kind of doing that, and it's really fun to kind of hear the heritage of that and know that God was moving then and God is moving now. And I guess something I've always been curious of is how have you seen what was happening at Mesa State as far as campus ministries and things like that? Are people intentionally trying to reach the college campus then versus what you see now? What was around then, or were you guys kind of the only big draw at the time?
No, I think you can speak to this as well, Nate. I know Mesa has always struggled with maybe some campus ministries. It just has, and I'm not exactly sure why. But I can also speak to the other side of that. There's been some people who have been serving the students at CMU for years upon years upon years upon years. And there is some faithful people who serve the students at CMU. I think FCA is a great program. I think FCA does a fabulous job at CMU. I think Young Life has really kicked it up here in the past few years. And they're really, really, really trying to be a place for students where they don't lose their faith in their college years. I think Baptist Student Union. I think that there's just some really faithful organizations on CMU. I'm really proud of each one of them because I think it's a hard, as much as I love this demographic is really hard. And the reason it's really hard is because they come in for 4 years and they leave. And so there's this constant turnover in it. And so anybody that serves 20-somethings, I think they're fantastic. Yeah.
So then I guess my the final thought that I wanted to just hear your heart on is what fruit did you see through the door, and how did Nate play a role in that? I'll give you an opportunity to publicly brag on Nate for a minute, because I know he loves that. Who doesn't love just public thanks and appreciation, So yeah, what kind of fruit did you see through your time at the door, and then how did Nate play a role in that, and how did you guys switch hands?
There's certain people that come into your life. So first, let me tell you, it's really easy to brag on me. Sorry, Nate, I won't look at you. It's just there's certain people that come into your life, and they're just really easy to brag on because they love Jesus and they love people. And so there's this thing that happens, and it happens for guys, and it's a painful experience, but it has to happen. Something has to die so that something can live. It's natural. It's the way it's always gone. It's really, you see it in nature. You see it in pieces, and there's always this passing of the torch. There's a place where you pass the torch, and just as a pastor, in my heart, I'm a builder. That's what I do. I build things. I start things. I build things. I create things. It's always been a part of my DNA. I don't know how I got it or how it works. But there's this place. I did youth ministry for 19 years. When I started doing youth ministry here at the church, I was 26, and we were here till I turned 40. And so we built student ministry, and then we built young adult ministry. And there's this thing that you see, and what you want to do is you want to pass it to someone who loves Jesus and who's faithful and trustful. And then what you want them to do is make it 1,000,000 times better than you ever did it. And that's when the door went from the door to Kaleo. And it just became better because it was being led by 20-somethings. And that's what you want. You want to see people who take ownership of their generation. One of my mentors, he used to say, Dan, used to say, every generation is responsible for reaching their own generation. I'm not responsible for this generation anymore. I'm responsible for other generations. But you guys are responsible for your generation. You're responsible for your generation. And so when we changed it from the door, and I think the interesting story about the door is whenever we came up with the name for the door, came up with it, I really tried and pray about, like, what should we call something? Names are a big deal to me. And so I was praying about it, and we were in the break room, and as we're in the break room, I'm sitting there, and Ronnie Higuera's in the break room, and I said, man, dude, I had this really weird name, and I'm trying this really weird dream, and I keep seeing this word, Theodore. And he looks at me and goes, you mean the door? So I didn't actually name it. Ronnie named it. He goes, you mean the door? And I went, yeah, the door. And I described the dream to him, and he goes, you mean the door? And that's really where it came from. But really just in the faithfulness of being able to look at Nate, and really we had a bunch of conversations of, hey, dude, I think you might be the guy, and a bunch of conversations of you saying, no, dude, I'm not the guy. and really coming back and the Lord really breaking your heart. And you guys, I'm really proud that you guys took the door, and I'm really proud that you changed the name to Kaleo and what Kaleo means. And I'm really proud that you took Kaleo and you guys made it better.
So I guess first of all, thank you. I think we should just maybe give a round for Paul Watson, give a round of applause for him.
But can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Nobody starts anything by themselves. Tim Nutting faithfully served the door for 5 years. And he was the worship leader for 5 years. And then Tim went with us downtown, and Tim and I started the Downtown Vineyard Church. And he faithfully served the Downtown Vineyard Church. And nobody starts something by themselves. The door started because 40 people showed up and said, let's do this thing. And it started because people showed up and they shook hands and they greeted people and they invited their friends. And we just get to be lucky enough to get to pastor those people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, man. Thank you for your faithfulness. And I guess, so shifting kind of a little bit to Nate, I want you to talk first about how did that feel? Those conversations, like let's pick it up right there, the conversations between you and Paul, what was going through your mind, what was the thing? Because it seems like for me, when you say you're not going to do something in a ministry context, oftentimes it means like you're going to end up doing that thing that you said, no, I'll never do that. So how did that exchange go from your lens, and then what happened when you first took over?
Well, there's so many things to say in that, just because we covered a lot of stuff. So I secretly wanted it the whole time. That's, we got to get that out there. I used to sit out here, like right there where the aisle is now, because it was set up differently. I used to sit there and watch Pastor Dan and think, like, yeah, I'm coming for his job someday. So just like, so it was always there, like the leadership, the call to leadership. But I think what was going on at the time, and then I want to get back to Paul. What was going on at the time was we were coming out, the church globally across America was coming out of this culture of Christianity where kids were taught that they knew they were supposed to be anti-gay, anti-abortion. We had these cultural issues. We were pro-Christian culture, pro-Christian music, anti-secular music, and we were doing a really good job discipling kids. And this was a Paul. This church, the mission was be the church within church, and they did that amazingly, arms wide open in this church. But it was the culture. And I knew just from my own experience going to college and being in college ministries there, just being a part of the Christian culture, that we were kind of getting confused. And that we were when it came to our theology, we were an inch deep, but we had a mile of depth of questions. And so for me, Paul had basically handed this perfect vehicle over. So when Paul says you don't build anything by yourself, like I literally built nothing. I simply just got under the hood and tuned the engine. And we wanted it to run on the fact that, look, I had questions. Other people had questions. And some of them are the deep questions. Some of them are the very common questions. What about the guy in Africa who's a really good guy and loves his family and is trying to find God but never finds him and dies? Like, that's a legitimate question. And it just didn't seem like the Christian church was coming up with good answers. And so we wanted to dive into theology, and we didn't want to make it boring. There were churches that were doing, like, answering well. Like, their answers were more educated, more in-depth, more biblically based than any answer I ever probably gave. But they weren't doing it for people in real-life situations. And there's an Andy Stanley quote. He says, some people teach the Bible. Some churches teach the Bible, and that's great. Some people teach the Bible to people, and that's great. They actually recognize there should be people listening. And then there's churches that teach the Bible to people in order that their lives might be changed. And so that was what I really wanted to do. Is I felt like the millennial generation, the end of the Xers, we were all had these questions, and Christian culture was kind of tanking too at the time. It was getting embarrassing, and so I was like, let's just base this on the Bible and its relevance for us. And I think every church has that goal in mind, but we had the uniqueness of being in the generation. And there was one other thing, is that millennials are really built on passion and purpose. Like the number one question I think that drives that generation, and I've come to find out I'm part of that generation, so I have to eat crow on a lot of the mocking of millennials I've done, is that we have this burning question: what's my purpose in life? What am I going to do? And we want to always pursue purpose and passion before it seems like responsibility or anything else. And that's where Kaleo came from. I was memorizing Ephesians at the time, and it's the only book I ever memorized, and I can't remember any of it, so be unimpressed. But I came to, so Ephesians 1-3 is just theology, really good theology, and it's all about the grace of God, and you didn't earn it, and it brings the humility that the church needed at the time, because it was throwing stones at the people Jesus had died to save, and instead the church was throwing stones at them. So it's great theology, and then it hits this point in 4:1 where it says, therefore, based on all the theology that came in the previous chapters, therefore, live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Since you have been called, live a life worthy of the calling you received. And I realized all millennials need to know is that God has called them to understand chapter 1, 2, and 3 of Ephesians, right, and the rest of the Bible, but keeping it in context of Ephesians, and then simply go out, whether they're a barista at Starbucks, whether they're a banker, a mortgage lender, whether they're a student. It doesn't matter. They need to go out there and get 1, 2, and 3 applied to the people around them. Mm-hmm. And just let those people know God's called you as well. You're God's workmanship. And so that was the transition, is that, and Paul, he left me with like a gift. It was, I didn't have to do anything to the service. That was the beautiful part. I got to focus on other things at the time.
So I think what's awesome is you're doing that, and we're talking about the millennials, right? And so how many of you guys are in the millennial generation right now? Would you just do me a favor? Would you just repeat this after me? I'm here. You're welcome. So that's what millennials. I'll just give you that little bit of humor. Anyway.
No. But pause on that for a second, because I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for showing up, because the millennial generation isn't showing up, and so thank you for showing up, because it's two people who show up that the light of the world gets to shine through and hope gets to come through. And so, thank you.
Absolutely. So then, Nate, you have this thing, and you have it off and running, and kind of describe what it was like to take that over, and then as you started to implement that, Ephesians 4, teaching through that, and making that kind of the motto, or like kind of the life verse of Kaleo. What kind of fruit did you start to see as you began to teach through that? What did you start to see in the people that were building the service with you, that were building the ministry with you, and the people that were sitting out in the seats?
Well, one thing is we had an awesome team. Again, another thing that was gifted is that Paul had assembled all of the young adults on staff, and he'd somehow managed to get a dotted line across the org chart so that everybody landed in Kaleo somehow, even though they might have been the production people or just various things, the sound booth. Like, why did we have the sound guy always in our meetings, right? How did we pull that one off? Well, Paul had arranged it so that they were all part of the planning meeting. And so it was actually really exciting because we were just a bunch of us young folks, and Dad gave us the keys to the house, and he said play. And so it was fun, man. We had the videos were probably like the greatest outlet for a lot of our fun, and we just got to do anything we wanted. And on that, so Paul leaves, and Kirk is coming over, and the church is in a very difficult place. And Kirk does this thing where I think most leaders would have come in, and they would have seen the chaos, and they would have just, like, nothing's happening without my signature. And Kirk just took me to Canyon City, hung out with me for a little bit, He had to go do a wedding for a guy that he knew there. And so he just took me, just randomly, like, hey, come on with me. And then after that, he was just kind of like, okay, well, Paul gave you the keys. I'm going to give you the keys. Here's all the rope you want. And Kirk just trusted us and gave us the freedom. And I got to say, there's something about having people who believe in you. If you guys find a leader or a boss who believes in you, don't take them for granted. I could point to a conversation where a guy was on the phone with Paul, like, wanting my head. And Paul was just like, sit down, I'll call him. And Paul calls him, and he's just like, you be quiet. And he just talks with this dad. His dad had felt like we'd just done his son a whole bunch of wrong. And maybe we had, maybe hadn't. Regardless, he wanted me dead. And Paul just stepped in front of those bullets and used his experience to deflect the bullets and to calm the guy down and to bring peace. There was a time where I could make jokes that weren't maybe church appropriate always or the wisest. And I made one on a weekend service. And the fact that I was preaching on a weekend service shows you there, too, how much Kirk, enabled and trusted and empowered me. But I had made a joke about old people. And
at that time, that was anybody over 35.
Yeah, no, this was, yeah. Anyway, and we had a prominent member of the community. We had a prominent member of the community there that Sunday, and they're regular attenders. And these are things you don't think about when you're young, by the way. His mother had just passed away. She was in her 80s. And just passed away, like Saturday. And he's coming Sunday for solace, and I'm cracking jokes about, like, old people breaking their hips. And so he writes an email, and he sends it to Kirk. And Kirk goes, hey, just so you know, I talked to him. Here's the email. And I look at it, and I was like, ooh, that's bad. But Kirk stuck his neck out for me. And like I said, this was a prominent member of the community. People would know that I was talking about. And this guy later came and apologized, and he's a wonderful person. He really is. But it just, when you have people that are above you in leadership, that believe in you, and they give you input, and they empower you, it's priceless. And so there's a lot of gratitude. I was writing stuff down last night, and I didn't even, there's a section where I didn't write for Paul, because it's books, right? There's no, Encyclopedia Britannica. There's dating yourself. They don't know. Wikipedia.
What? Wikipedia.
And where I was just writing down just how grateful I am to have leaders like Paul and Kirk who have poured into me. They've just been great to recognize that young people need a chance, and they need grace, and they need rope.
That's really encouraging, I think, because we're seeing sort of a pattern here, a pattern of discipleship, of a Paul and Timothy kind of relationship where somebody who's a little further down the road decides to take somebody under their wing and decides to empower them, decides to equip them, decides to train them, even probably rebuke them at certain times and tell them the things that they need to work on, and kind of give them that honest feedback that our culture just is not built for honest feedback anymore, and to get that is so priceless. And then so as you receive that from Paul, and as you receive that from Kirk, how did you create a vehicle in Kaleo where you could do that as well with your peers and also with those that are a little younger than you?
Well, that was actually a challenge that I think we were really trying to solve at the time that I left, because I think the way we did it initially was just there's the hill, kind of Roosevelt style. There's the hill. Who's with me? Draw your pistol and run. And I think that's how we really got through my first 6 years in Kaleo was just like pointing to hills and charging. And I think we realized that, like, as we were growing, you know, we're sitting down as leaders and we're going, if we keep charging at this rate, we're going to be dead soon. And so we actually never got to a good place where we learned how to trickle it down. But I think the reason that I think people maybe stayed with me wasn't because I had the greatest idea or the sharpest vision or the best preacher, any of that stuff. I think it was because, like, the vision, like, share my vision, it's yours. Ownership was given. Like, anytime you try to control in leadership, it's all about you. Like, that person is saying, "Oh, I need the credit, I need the power. That's all about me." And anytime you share, you're going to be successful because, you know, like Sarah Allen, Brett, you know, all the staff folks. When I'm trying to think of all the volunteers, even Cody and Dusty, I saw them. There's so many. Leah, I couldn't go through everyone. Joe, Hannah, like they just charged the hill with me, and that was why we were successful.
Well, and I would even say from an outside perspective looking in, as I watched the transition of Kaleo take place, you were the leader, but it was a shared vision. You had this common shared vision of people that went, "Yep, this isn't Nate's. This is ours. This is our service. This is ours." And you watched people just give their all to it, and that was one of my favorite things to come back and watch, is it was a shared vision.
So I think I'll leave you with I will leave us with this as the worship team gets ready to come. We're going to lead in worship, and by the way, our worship team is comprised of Tim Nutting, the original Door worship leader, Rachel Dawson, who's the original, is that correct, original Kaleo worship leader, and then Tim Brown, who's the current leader, which this is awesome. So if you want to know even like how I got involved with Kaleo, Rachel used to allow Tim to lead once in a while from the drums. So he was the drummer, he'd come up front. And so then Tim got the opportunity to bring some friends to come play music with him, to come play worship. And I got to be one of those guys, and that's how I came to Kaleo, was by way of doing probably the anchor basically of any ministry, which is the bass guitar. So I since then have gotten demoted to teaching and speaking, but you know, it all started on the bass. But as we're kind of, I was just thinking about this today, and one of the things that I'm so grateful for is, number one, senior leaders like Paul and Kirk, who believe in young people. And I think the coolest thing was the way I joined the staff is that I kind of came to Kaleo off and on for a while. I was volunteer leading at another church, and I kind of came and sat, and I remember this, and my wife's sitting right over here. We used to sit right up over there. We kind of came burned out from the last ministry experience that we had, and we sat, and we would leave before, like, if I wasn't playing, we would leave before that last song finished. We didn't want to talk to anyone. We were hurting. And I remember Nate just taking me out to Starbucks on 24 Road, and which was really just gracious of him, because I worked at Starbucks on 25 Road at the time, you know. And he just asked me if I want to have a cup of coffee when I smelled like coffee. And so we sat, and he said to me, he said, "Gabe, I think that there's more in you than this. You're doing a good job making coffee for people, and it's cool, but I think there's something else in there, and I'd like you to consider applying to join the staff." And so for me, I didn't know I was going to head to this church. I honestly was hiding in the best possible place, which was back there, and God took me on this whirlwind journey with Nate and with Derek, bringing me onto the staff. And I would just like to say to you guys, because it really, you can see when you see the progression, you see this is a joint effort, you know, that even though, did I know Paul Watson at the time? No. But thank you, because you poured into a guy in Nate who then saw something in me that I did not see in myself. I'd just like to say thank you for that.
You're welcome, Gabe.
Awesome.
And then I'd like to show my photo too. So let's just trickle up instead of trickle down. Do you have that photo? That doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people. Linnea is laughing.
That's awesome.
That is a high five to me. I didn't grow up in church, and I was always on the periphery of church, whether it was through friends or getting in trouble and having to go to Catholic school for a while. But I didn't grow up in church, and so when I started wandering in the church doors, I was a little apprehensive. And one day I got up the courage one Sunday to go into the youth service. And that's the old youth building of our old building that this church was in for a lot of years, where it experienced a lot of growth. And I walked in those two double doors on the right. I didn't even make it in them. There was this 29-year-old guy with a goatee who was trying to be hip for skateboarders and people who listen to punk music. And he would have done anything. He would have jumped on the skateboard and tried to do tricks and hurt himself. And I walked up, and he gave me a high five. And they weren't cool in the 90s.
High fives were still cool.
They weren't cool. They're cool again, because they're ironic now.
Is that ironic or iconic?
Yeah, either way.
Yeah.
And he gave me a smile and a high five, and he said, hey, what's your name? I said, I'm Nate. And, and he welcomed me in, big friendly smile, and I got in there and I saw some people from school I knew, and I felt super welcomed. And the next week I came, and he goes, hey, Nate, how are you? He remembered my name. And that dorky 29-year-old was not really that dorky. I thought he was the coolest thing in the whole world, actually. I say dorky to tease you, but you were my hero. I tried to grow a goatee the moment I met Paul, but it wasn't there yet. And that was Paul. And, whenever I get a chance to talk about Paul in front of people in a church, I like to share the power of a high five, or the power of a bump, and knowing someone's name. Because I wouldn't be here if Paul hadn't given me a high five, welcomed me in, and remembered my name. And so the rest in between is details. But Paul, that's why Paul is everything to me. That's why I couldn't begin to write down all the things that he means in my life. And I've had a lot of great leaders pour into me. A lot of great leaders do a lot of things. But when life gets rough, I call Paul. I still call Paul. He's like my go-to, I'm stuck in life, Paul. Can we go for a walk? And so thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
So we're going to transition. Yeah, that's a great way to transition. We're going to play a video as we prepare for worship about another few people who didn't get to stand up on the stage tonight necessarily, but that Kaleo meant a lot to them. So take a look at the screens.
Cool. All set. All right. What did Kaleo mean to me? Freshman year of college is a crucial point for anyone's faith as they kind of leave their folks home and they start to make their own decisions. You kind of find out if it's real or not. And so Kaleo was a place for me and all my Christian friends that we got plugged into, where we grew. Kaleo was a ministry that was answering questions that young people were asking, and they were answering them from the Word of God. And that Kaleo will always be a huge part of a lot of people's testimonies who went to Colorado Mesa, and just young people in the Grand Valley.
My name is Brett Phillips. I'm the assistant pastor and the youth pastor at the Clifton Vineyard Church. When we touched down at Kaleo, it was the first night it started, and our lives were a mess. I knew that I knew God, but I knew that I didn't know Jesus. Everything began to change. I remember to this day the seat, the row that I was in this auditorium when Jesus really changed my life. Kaleo was where I learned to serve and where I learned to worship. It was where my now wife and I learned that it was okay to give God our broken relationship, and in turn He gave us a marriage. It was where I learned a value that's so incredibly important to me of small group and community. It's where we met people to this day that are still some of our closest friends and mentors, and that we get to be invested in their lives and they're still invested in ours. Kaleo was my first church home. It was the first place I felt connected, like I belonged, and where I was given an opportunity to serve. So many things have come from that.
Well, Kaleo meant a lot to me. And actually I was there when it was the Door as well. And for me, coming out of college, and I've been in, all these college ministries and that kind of thing, now stepping out into the real world, I didn't really know exactly where I fit. And finding a ministry that was for young adults, it was people, my age that were all trying to figure out this real world, thing together, and seeking Jesus together was really, really life-giving for me at the time. It's had a huge impact on my walk with Jesus.
Growing up, there was one person passionate about ministry in my life, and that was my dad, which he had a huge impact on me. But it was able to do something for me when I moved completely away from my family to a state that I didn't know anyone, and met all these people, John Cox, Jared, Tim Brown, Nate Ralston. I met all these people who had these individual gifts, and they were using them for ministry and to reach people. And that was a huge part, I think, just by example of me wanting to use the gifts and talents that God has given me to build the church and also reach people for Christ. How did Kaleo prepare me for the job I'm doing now? I think the biggest thing was the desire to do what you're doing with excellency for the Lord. John Piper said that a lot of ministries have a shoddy approach when it comes to worship. And that was just not the case when it came to Kaleo. It was a bunch of people who had been gifted by God, who were working hard to sharpen those gifts and use them for ministry. There was a level of excellency that was demanded, and it was demanded for the right reason, that this is for the Lord, and so God deserves our best. And that's an attitude that I will always have, and that was developed by the leadership at Kaleo.
And I think the real question is, how has Kaleo not impacted what I do now? And I can't really answer that, because it's impacted everything. I work with students, I work with adults, I work with other church planters. When I look back at it, I realize that this was the point that everything stemmed from. And so when I think about the small group that I have now, that was a value that I learned. When I think about church family and what I want community to look like in the church that I work at now, I think about Kaleo and the things that came out of that. And I think about the t-shirts and the jokes and the laughter and all these values that taught me that not only could church be fun, but so could a relationship with Jesus.
How it's affected me today, there's numerous ways. But I look around at the people that I walk through life with, and a lot of those relationships either started from or were solidified in Kaleo. And my small group that I have today, we've been going for years, and we're just really a community of people that came out of Kaleo for the most part. And we're really, literally learning how to walk through life together and do this together and encourage each other as we grow closer to Jesus. And then other than that, the biggest thing that stands out is just friends like Nate and Jared and different people there at Kaleo that called out gifts in me, that they said, hey, we see this thing in you, and you need to step out and do it and grow in that. And I'm still growing in those gifts today. I'm still getting to use those gifts today. And I don't know that I would have taken them if I would have actually really discovered that or taken it so seriously if I hadn't had that encouragement from people. And so Kaleo's had a large impact so far on my walk with God.